Very good. Well, maybe I'll start. I don't know if any more are coming. I'm glad to see you on a Thanksgiving weekend. Thanks for coming. I wanted to review something that I said the very first session. I don't know whether you were here the very first session, but it's important to review it. I was talking about levels of reality. And if you say 5 levels of reality, and the reason it's important is because prophets or messengers or manifestations of God are in the middle of those 5 levels. And that's important to understand in terms of believers. The believers in any tradition give special respect to their founder. And when we're talking to people who've never heard about the Baha'i faith, it's important to explain that we believe that Baha'u'lláh is like in the same station as Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or Moses. The first level I described was the natural world, and that's the world of elements and plants and animals. And then the human level is the second one, and that's the level of consciousness or awareness or reason, will, that sort of thing. And then the third level up in that hierarchy was the manifestation of God, who takes human form, but has powers that are greater than human, knows the will of God, can reveal the word of God or scriptures. And then higher than the level of the manifestation, we could say is the word of God itself or the Holy Spirit. It's called different things in different traditions. In Buddhism, it's called Dharma, the realm of truth. Higher than that would be, Baha'is would say, the unknown mystery or God, the creator, ultimate reality. So, distinguishing those levels, I think, are very important in introducing the Baha'i faith because they might think of Baha'u'llah as understood as a wise man. I know I did for 10 years. For a certain amount of time, I was thinking of Baha'u'llah as a very brilliant, wise man who was putting together the best parts of all other religions. And until I embraced this possibility that he could be a manifestation of God, a prophet, a messenger, capital M, or a prophet, capital P, then I started to see him differently. And the whole story changed. The story of what I was learning about Baha'u'llah changed. That explained things like why he could know what people were thinking before they talked to him. That explained how he knew what was going to happen in the future. That explained how he knew what the Bab was wanting and doing without talking to the Bab, without ever having met the Bab, his forerunner. Okay, here's another thing I was going to bring up. In case someone needs evidence, what would be the evidence for that Baha'u'llah is a messenger or a manifestation, or that Jesus was a manifestation, or that Muhammad was a manifestation? Some of the evidences or types of proofs that are given in Baha'i writings are the person, and it took me a while to know what they meant, that the person of Baha'u'llah, that is to say, the spiritual qualities that he conveyed when he was with people, is one kind of evidence. Another kind of evidence is that he had innate knowledge, that is, knew things that he was not taught, didn't learn what was in the Quran by going to school, didn't learn about what was in the Bible by studying the Bible. He automatically knew. Another type of evidence that a figure is a manifestation is that they can reveal divine verses. And that's an important one. In other words, they can say messages for humanity that come from a higher level of reality that are automatically well written. Ordinary people, when they write something, they often have to fix it. So the manifestations can reveal verses, flawlessly, whether they're under conditions of persecution or not. Another type of quality manifestations have is that they're fearless. They're not afraid to, for example, write a letter to a king, like Baha'u'llah did. They're not afraid to do things that ordinary people would be afraid to do. They're not afraid to walk right towards an army that's been sent to, uh, arrest them. They're not afraid to do ordinary things. Another type of evidence is the impact that the revealer has on the followers. So they take ordinary people, or sometimes brilliant people, and they change them into humble, wise, self-sacrificing, very courageous people who are willing to build a whole new civilization at any price. So that's another type of evidence. Another type of evidence is that they seem to know the future. That's maybe a part of that other one called innate knowledge, but foreknowledge, they're able to prophesy. Anyway, you can find in Baha'i writings this list of proofs or evidences. So those are important to bear in mind because Baha'is are making the claim that Baha'u'llah is like Muhammad, like Jesus, like Moses, like Buddha, and that humanity needs another such figure because the world has unique problems that couldn't be solved by the previous messages from the other revealers. Okay, that's like a little bit of a review. Today this is our third session on Baha'u'llah. We had 2 sessions on the Bab, so this is the third one, and the last one on Baha'u'llah. One more session. Next time we look at Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. In other words, we're looking at the foundation set up by Baha'u'llah, and briefly at the Universal House of Justice. Today I hope we're gonna look at the story of Baha'u'llah in the Holy Land, that is in Akka, near Mount Carmel, at Baji and Mazra'i, the last, say, 19 years of Baha'u'llah's life. And the surprising thing about it is that he started to live almost like a king. In other words, the story has been full of persecution and suffering and danger. And the story starts out that way, full of suffering, very intense suffering in the prison in Akka. And then gradually the Baha'i community wins the respect of everyone, and Baha'u'llah is starting to be revered by everyone locally, whether they're Baha'is or not, whether they're Muslim or Christian. And people start to be able to visit Baha'u'llah from quite a distance. And he even gets visitors from Europe, at least one important one called Edward Granville Brown, a scholar who knew Persian. An interesting man. He decided to learn Persian perfectly so that he could go to Persia and study the Babi movement and the Baha'i faith very intimately. Okay, so I need some readers. If you look at page 1, we're looking at storylines or episodes, 18 through 25. And before I do that, I want to do one more thing. I want to read to you from this book. It's called God Speaks Again. Some of you heard of this book, God Speaks Again. It's written by a National Spiritual Assembly member of the U.S., Kenneth Bowers. And he talks about what it was like to actually see Baha'u'llah. See, we were talking before about the person of Baha'u'llah. What is it like to actually encounter Baha'u'llah? And as you know, some people who saw Baha'u'llah were intimidated by him, or some were hated him. Some were just curious about him at first. Some revered him. Some already saw him as a messenger of God. So there was all these different starting points, but people always were very, very impressed. And so this is an attempt to sort of describe what it's like to actually meet him. So this is a man named Haydar Ali. I'm probably pronouncing that. Haydar Ali, something like that. Something like that. Okay. He says his very movements, he's talking about Baha'u'llah, his manners, his way of sitting or standing, eating or drinking, even his sleep or wakefulness were each a miracle to me. So he's saying, he's already a believer, but he found everything about Baha'u'llah was striking. He says, uh, what about people who are not believers in Baha'u'llah? He asked this question. What can it be attributed to, being impressed with Baha'u'llah? What can that be attributed to when one enters into his presence as an antagonist and leaves as a believer? Okay, you come in to meet Baha'u'llah as an antagonist, and then you leave as a believer. Or when you come as an enemy, but go out as a friend. Or come to raise controversial arguments, but depart without being able to say anything, and attributing this to Baha'u'llah's magic. In other words, there probably were a lot of people like me in those days who had a lot of questions. I like to study, I like to read, I like to think. Had I heard about Baha'u'llah, I would have tried to talk to him, one way or the other. And I would have listed a whole bunch of questions. And they're saying that people who came with perhaps some skeptical or critical questions, when they got there, they forgot what their questions were. That happened very, very frequently. A lot of people mentioned that same phenomenon. And sometimes what Baha'u'llah would do is answer those questions anyway. Right? So he would know what you were going to ask him, and you forgot. And he also describes how when people often, no matter whether they started out as an enemy or a friend or a believer, when they leave, when they depart from Baha'u'llah, they would sort of automatically bow down. That would happen, whether they planned to or not. It was sort of an unconscious thing. Okay, so that's the description. I want to give you my own interpretation that I believe the same kind of thing happened with all of the other manifestations of God. Things like that happened with Muhammad and with Jesus and with Buddha and Krishna and Zoroaster and Moses. Things like that. And it could be that is an example of a recognition of a higher station. So I was talking about those 5 stations: natural, human, the manifestation level, the Holy Spirit, and the ultimate level of God. So many people recognize that a manifestation is at another level. They don't quite know what to do with that phenomenon because most everyone we meet is at the same level, human. And then occasionally, historically it's happened. Some people have got to meet one of these manifestations. Okay, so let's just look at page 1. Some of those. Steve, I'll pick on you for a while. Can you read 18 and 19? And look see, I have some of these out of order. You see part of 18 is down there. You see where my circle goes? Okay, so the 18 is the most great prison.
The most great prison. Their first 2 years in the most great prison in Akka were a time of severe sufferings for Baha'u'llah, his family, and close followers, and several died due to the unhealthy conditions in what he called the metropolis of the owl. Many pilgrims who came to see the blessed beauty and the prophet of the new day of God had to rest content with a glimpse of his waving hand from the barred window of his prison cell. But the divine qualities of Baha'u'llah, of Abdu'l-Baha, and Bahia Khan became increasingly visible to their captors and to the residents of Akka.
Okay, so that's the first pattern, and go on to the second pattern.
Sacrificing his son Mehdi and opening the way for pilgrimages, 1870. One evening, Baha'u'llah's son Mehdi was praying on the roof of the barracks when he fell through a skylight onto a wooden crate, piercing his ribs. Baha'u'llah asked him his wish, and Mehdi wanted his death to be a sacrifice, enabling distant Baha'is to attain Baha'u'llah's presence. And this wish was granted as a divine favor.
Okay, so let's stop and pause on this second one, because this is a significant passage for Baha'is. So Baha'u'llah's son looks like he's going to die, Mehdi, and his wife, I think Nawab was expecting him maybe to heal his son, because it's assumed that Baha'u'llah could have done that. You might say that's yet another evidence for the level of a manifestation. They can heal, and they can perform miracles, but they often don't do it on purpose. Anyway, so Baha'u'llah, asks Mehdi, what does he want? What is his wish? And Mehdi says, I would like to die as a sacrifice to enable people to see you. Isn't that an amazing wish for, he's about 20 years old, this kid, maybe 22. That's his wish, and Baha'u'llah grants it. Now, does it come true soon after this? They're in prison at this point. Does it come true that people are able to visit Baha'u'llah? It turns out it does, because over the next 7 years after this, 1870, those 7 years they're given better quarters outside the prison, still inside the city of Akka, but better housing. More and more people can visit them. And then we're going to learn later on, after that, he goes to the mansion of Mazra'i. That's outside the city altogether, out in the beauty of the countryside. And then even a bigger place called Baji, or Delight, for the last, say, 13 years of Baha'u'llah's life. And so the more freedom that Baha'u'llah got, the more visitors he could get. And the more visitors he got, the more messages could be conveyed back to other places where there were Baha'i communities. So the faith spread that way by people being able to visit Baha'u'llah. Okay, and then there's a section here called Continuing Struggles with Yahya. That's the jealous half-brother. We won't look at that one. 21 and 22 are out of order, I think. But the Most Holy Book is revealed in 1873. That's a very short book, but a very powerful book. So it's laws for a new dispensation. We'll look at that a little bit later. But it's written in a different kind of language than laws are. It's very powerful spiritual language, moral and symbolic language, as well as in some detail too, with some flexibility for future development of law as humanity evolves over, say, a millennium. We'll get to that later. Now, Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, and his sister Bahia start to take more and more responsibility for all those people that are trying to visit Baha'u'llah. It's a growing number of people. The enlargement of the Baha'i community itself, relationships to people locally and regionally. So Abdul Baha is becoming more and more important to the Baha'i faith. That's a piece of this story. Now, section 23. So, Golnush, can I have you read 23? So this is a longer session that's describing a lot of years. In other words, 1870 all the way to 1892. Okay, so let's read this one. Mansions of Splendor.
Mansions of splendor and establishing the new world order. For the next 7 years, the Holy Family was offered the relative comfort of house arrest in various residences outside the prison, but within the city walls of Akka. Baha'u'llah, partly in response to the inquiries of Baha'i pilgrims from Middle Eastern countries and India, revealed more guidance on the coming New World Order that would emerge after the retributive calamities directly due to the moral spiritual negligence of world rulers. Even those who did not believe in the cause and station of Baha'u'llah were able to recognize his saintly character and illuminating wisdom. The civic and religious leaders of Akka and the surrounding regions often consulted Baha'u'llah on how they might improve material and spiritual conditions for their people. Abdul Baha was able to rent a home with a garden and stream so that Baha'u'llah could enjoy the natural wonders associated with his youthful days in northern Iran. He stayed at the mansion of Mazra'i for 2 years, followed by his final 13 years at the mansion of Bahji, enjoying the respect and adoration of a king, with freedom to reveal more guidance and establish enduring foundations for a divinely guided civilization.
So this little chapter in Baha'u'llah's life, I think, is relatively unique. As compared to other founders of great religions. Zoroaster, for example, he was killed. He was killed while he was worshiping in a fire temple. So there were some holy wars occurring during Zoroaster's ministry. And Moses was still struggling to get to the promised land, when he ascended or passed away. Jesus, was crucified. Muhammad, the last 2 years of his life were relatively peaceful, but there had been struggle up until that time. But what we're being told is Baha'u'llah had, the worst persecution that we've ever heard, and his people are suffering in many parts of the Middle East, but gradually, after 1870, starts to have more and more freedom. So this is very unusual. He's even able to do things like look back at all the things he's written and pick some of the things that he wants to emphasize. Right, so one of the books is called Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. We're going to look at that later briefly. But I never saw a book like that on the part of a founder of a religion, where they get to tell you, of all the things I've taught you, I want to emphasize a few of them, and then tell you some new ones too. So it would be like an album called Greatest Hits of somebody who's got a lot of great hits. So it's very unusual, that kind of a book. He had the opportunity to kind of summarize and, give shape to how his revelation was to be understood. Okay, Genevieve, we willing to read storyline 24 or episode 24, bottom of the first page?
Summarizing Revelation and Visions of Mount Carmel. Baha'u'llah's last major revelation was Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, a summary of the key principles and passages from his previous writings. He prescribed wisdom, justice, compassionate service, and divine obedience in the building of an ever more unified world community. He was able to pitch his tent at the foot of Mount Carmel, showing Abdu'l-Baha where the future shrine of the Bab would be built, alluding also to future institutions and developments of the New World faith.
Okay, so he's able to pitch his tent at Mount Carmel. He did that 4 times. He even talked to people called the Templars, which were Christians from Germany who came there, apparently only a few years earlier than this, waiting for the return of Christ. He actually talked to them and apparently was friendly. They didn't recognize that he represented the spirit of the return of Christ. He also talked to Carmelites up on Mount Carmel near the cave of Elijah. Some of you have been to Mount Carmel, and you maybe have gone to the cave of Elijah, and I think there's still a monastery of the Carmelites there. He saw some Carmelites, and they too enjoyed meeting him through a translator. They could talk with him, but they didn't recognize him as the one who they had come to Mount Carmel to await the arrival of the Spirit of Christ. Okay, we're telling this story from the point of view of Baha'is. Look at can you look at page 2, and at the top is the last of these episodes or storylines that I've identified. Anyone else willing to read? You will? Okay, number 25.
Clarifying successions, securing the covenant, spiritual ascension. About a year before his ascension, Baha'u'llah was visited by a respected British scholar, Edward Granville Brown, who composed a pen portrait of Baha'u'llah, as well as a large body of research for Western audiences on his mission and message. Baha'u'llah took great care to clarify that his successor would be Abdu'l-Baha, the center of his covenant and the perfect exemplar of every Baha'i ideal. May 29, 1892 is the historic date of Baha'u'llah's ascension, and his memorial was a week-long gathering of diverse dignitaries and appreciative multitudes sharing eloquent testimonies on the promised one of all ages and his world-changing mission.
Okay, so thousands and thousands of people came to that week-long memorial service for Baha'u'llah. And you know, there's an aspect of that I'm really impressed with. And that is that Abdul Baha, on one hand, is grieving because he lost his father. On the other hand, he's the one in charge of taking care of the needs of thousands and thousands of visitors and people who come there over a week to, give their respects to Baha'u'llah. He can't let his grief get in the way of that role. So the fact that he did that tells you he has a special station too. We learn about his station. I'll look at his station again next week, Abdul Baha. But if you try to empathize with that from a human point of view, your father has died, you're very close to your father, but you have to attend to the needs of many people, many, many, many people. And he did that in a spectacularly skillful way. Okay, can we look at page 2? In the middle of page 2, I give you this, something I've shown you before, but there are many titles given for Baha'u'llah. I just want to draw your attention to the ones that the Guardian uses to describe not so much who Baha'u'llah is, but what he is. Like, what is his station? What is his significance? Some of these titles are quite spectacular. That he said that Baha'u'llah was the organizer of the entire planet. You see where I'm reading? It's about a third of the way down on page 2. The organizer of the entire planet. The unifier of the children of men. The inaugurator of the long-awaited millennium. The originator of a new universal cycle for humanity. The establisher of the most great peace. The fountain of the most great justice. The proclaimer of the coming of age of the entire human race. This theme, the coming of age of the entire human race, this is sometimes called humanity's spiritual maturity, or our moral spiritual maturation. That's a major theme in the Baha'i revelation, and we're going to look at that near the end of this session today. A little bit about that theme. Also, Baha'u'llah was described as the creator of a new world order and the founder of a world civilization. Okay, that's all according to Baha'is. That is the station of Baha'u'llah. People who haven't heard of him would say, well, if he's all of these things, why haven't I heard of him? That's kind of a reasonable question. And I think the answer to that is along the line of, you don't build a world civilization overnight. The old expression was, Rome was not built in a day. How long did it take to build Rome? Maybe 700 years from it, the way it started. It was a hill, a set of hills in the middle of Italy. How long does it take to build it? So in other words, it hasn't come into full view yet. Some people see aspects of a global civilization already, like internet, and TV programs that can go. We see little aspects of it, and people who care about earthquake, people who've suffered earthquakes and hurricanes, they don't even know. People who make sacrifices for parts of humanity that they don't even know where they are on the map. They just rise up and serve. So things like that start to happen, but we don't see a global civilization yet. I think this whole idea of the bicentenary, where we're getting ready for the bicentenary celebrations, October 22nd. So 7 million Baha'is all around the world are going to look at Baha'u'llah and try to answer the question of why should the world know about him? And that's the challenge. It's not easy to show why, because these titles haven't been fulfilled yet. Right? Baha'is believe they will be fulfilled. It will become clearer and clearer in the future that all of those titles actually apply to Baha'u'llah. And in other words, future historians will say the beginning of the new era of modern history was 1863. That's just a guess. They're going to say that seems to be an enormous turning point. We didn't know it at the time, but if that's when Baha'u'llah declared he was the one who fulfills the prophecies of previous revelations and is going to teach humanity what we need to build a world society, then that date's going to look important, 100 or 200 or 300 years from now. Okay, that's looking at it all from a Baha'i point of view. Look on page 3. There's just a quick summary of some prophecies. See, the fact that Baha'u'llah and his family got to the Holy Land, they got to Akka, the fact that it was such a horrible prison can blind you to the fact that where they are is the Holy Land. It's holy for Jews, it's holy for Christians, it's holy for Muslims to some extent. So it's a very important place. There were a lot of references to things that were going to happen around there in the Bible. So I tried to summarize some of those very briefly. 1/3 of the way down, the arrival of Baha'u'llah in the Holy Land fulfilled ancient prophecies. David, you know who he is? The king, of Jerusalem about 3,000 years ago. David referred to Akka as the strong city, and in Psalm 24 wrote, "Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and the King of glory shall come in." Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. So to Christian ears, that sounds like it's referring to Christ or the return of Christ. To Muslim ears, this sounds like it's referring to Muhammad. To Baha'i ears, it sounds like it's referring to both Jesus and Muhammad, but most especially to Baha'u'llah, who is, a successor, you might say, another of God's representatives on earth. Hosea called Akka a door of hope. Micah, another Old Testament prophet, prophesied, "In that day they will come to you from Assyria." That was the old name for Persia, or a new name for Persia. "From sea to sea and from mountain to mountain." It sounds like, that sounds like the course that Baha'u'llah's family took as they were exiled in successive ways toward Akka. Ezekiel prophesied, "The glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east." It's interesting. That's in the past tense. The glory of the God of Israel came, but prophecy doesn't pay any attention to past tense, present tense, or future tense. That's just a little rule you discover when you study prophecy. Isaiah, one of the great Old Testament prophets, said, "Carmel shall see the glory of the Lord." You see, to Baha'i ears, you hear Carmel there and you hear glory of the Lord. Carmel shall see the glory of the Lord. Muhammad declared, "Blessed be the man that hath visited Akka, and blessed be he that hath visited the visitor of Akka." So this is just a few prophecies that sort of point to Akka and Haifa and Mount Carmel, as if something very, very significant is going to happen. And that has been known, to God for quite a long time, since about 2,700 years ago. And that's just a few of them. I was just giving you some. Okay. At the bottom of page 3, there's a summary of the Kitab-i-Aqdas, or the Book of Laws. And I put a box around, your name is Roya, right? You're willing to read some? Where it says Book of Laws, I just put, the Guardian, the figure we're going to look at next week, who developed a lot of the Baha'i institutions. He liked to summarize things, make long lists. And I know most people don't like long lists, but I do. Whenever I see a list, I said, oh, good, this is saving me a lot of time because it's a list of very important things. So he lists all of the laws in the Kitabi Akdas. We won't read all of them, but can you read that box that I, yeah.
Book of laws as follows: prescribes the obligatory prayers, designates the time and period of fasting, prohibits congregational prayer except for the dead, fixes the Qibla, point of adoration, Baha'u'llah's shrine in Akka, institutes the Huququllah, right of God, formulates the law of inheritance, ordains the institution of the temple, dawning place for remembering God, establishing the 19-day feasts, the Baha'i festivals and intercalary days, abolishes the institution of priesthood, prohibits slavery, asceticism, mendicancy,
That means begging, mendicancy, yeah, begging, okay.
monasticism, penance, the use of pulpits, and the kissing of hands. Prescribes monogamy.
Monogamy, yeah.
Monogamy, is that the monogamy?
Marrying,
one?
yeah.
Oh, yes, of
Yeah,
course, they,
Yeah.
yes.
One person, marrying one.
Condemns cruelty to animals, idleness and sloth, backbiting and calumny, censors divorce,
Interdicts.
interdicts gambling, the use of opium, wine, and other intoxicating drinks.
Okay, that's just to give you a flavor of it. The Guardian is amazing that he can make these kinds of lists. The summary of all the laws. Not that that tells you everything, that just shows you some of the scope. Okay, so that's a very, very important book. And remember, the reason he would write that book is he was starting to be asked a lot of questions because he started to be visited. Remember, Midi said he wanted his death to be a sacrifice, allowing more and more pilgrims to see Baha'u'llah, and they starts asking questions. And so it became time to write a book of laws that would undergird 1,000 years of a growing global civilization. Okay, can you look at page 4? Now, about right in the middle is something called the Most Holy Tablet. It's also called the Tablet to Christians. Would you mind reading this one? Yeah. In the Most Holy Tablet.
In the Most Holy Tablet, also called the Tablet of Christians, he addressed all Christians, declaring that he was the return of Christ, the Spirit of truth, who had come to lead them to all truth. He asked them to avoid the mistake of the Pharisees, the most learned in their day, who could not recognize Christ, yet a humble fisherman did. He summoned priests to leave their churches and proclaim his cause, and invited monks to abandon their
cloisters.
Okay, is that there another like a place where the monks are?
Yeah, there's that protects them from the world.
Okay.
You know,
And
walled.
work to benefit the souls of all as heirs of my kingdom. He prophesies the fall of bishops by divine justice, but said that they may also become stars of the heaven of my knowledge.
So this is a tablet, a significant one, written to Christians of the world. You know, that's a big group of people. About 1.2 billion people today are Christians. They're very different kinds of Christians: Protestants, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, all the subdivisions. It's a large group of people. And so he's saying your bishops are going to sort of fall from power. That's how I interpret this. But some of them are going to become stars of the heaven of my knowledge. So very important figures in the hierarchy of the Christian church are going to fall eventually, but some of them are going to use, you know, some of their skills to edify humanity. And then, please.
Is it true that the reason we have churches in every corner of every city has been for proclamation about the return of Jesus Christ? So that's the reason, the purpose of having all these churches is when he returns. these would be.
You know, that may have been part of the original thinking of building churches everywhere. But a great many Christians are not even focused on the return of Christ. Like for example, in the United Church of Canada, Anglican churches, do they have sermons about the return of Christ? Very infrequently. You know, it's almost like that issue has fallen off the map. Now, with some of the evangelical Christians, they are concerned with that. Latter-day Saints say they're specifically getting ready for the return of Christ. The same with the Seventh-day Adventists. There are certain groups, you know, very focused on that, but most Christians it's not a high priority. So anyway, yes, of course, it would have been at one time the idea to have a dawning place of the remembrance of God, to borrow a Baha'i term, in every city, whether it's a church or a mosque. Even when Judaism was expanding for a while, you know, it built synagogues. So every religion wants to have a place where you get closer to God very deliberately. And I think now Baha'is are saying, you know, we're going to have magical askars all over the world someday. And in the meantime, even a house that, you know, has prayers is like a dawning place of remembrance for God. So I'm probably not answering your question. I don't know how specific that was in Christian minds, that we're going to build churches so that we'll be all over the earth and we can see the return of Christ. That might have been some thinking originally, because Matthew 24, where that's described symbolically, was a very important part of, you know, Christian scripture that was studied a lot. Okay, I'm jumping to 3/4 of the way down. There's a summary of that book, Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, by The Guardian. I just want you to know it's there. And I love summaries by The Guardian because every phrase gives me homework. I want to see, why did he say that? Why did he say that? Why did he say that? It's an interesting shortcut to a lot of important things. Now, you know, there's a little tablet called the Tablet of Carmel. That's described a little bit near the bottom of page 4. And Baha'u'lláh says, call out to Zion, O Carmel. See, he's addressing the mountain. Baha'u'lláh is talking to the mountain. O Carmel, and announce the joyful tidings. He that was hidden from mortal eyes is come. Hasten forth and circumambulate. That means go around the city of God that hath descended from heaven. The celestial Kaaba. Kaaba is that holy place in Mecca. Round which have circled in adoration the favored of God. Ere long, this is a very important sentence. Ere long means before very long, God will sail his ark upon thee. You know what an ark is? This refers back to Noah's ark. An ark is, well, you could say it's a boat, but symbolically it would be an institution or a vehicle for saving humanity with divine guidance. So I think ark is being used very, very symbolically. Before long, God is going to sail his ark upon thee. And remember who he's talking to? Mount Carmel. So there's going to be some kind of ark there. And will manifest the people of Baha who have been mentioned in the book of names. Here's something that confused me for a long time. It shows you how my mind can get distracted. I went to a presentation by an architect who helped build the Ark of Buildings on Mount Carmel. And the word ark there is A-R-C. So that ark it means a curve. That's an ark. And I think, well, wait a second. Is it an ark with a K, a boat, or a vehicle that's going to help save the world? Or is it an ark like this, a curve of buildings? And then I started to realize, well, you know, they're both the same thing in this case. At least from the Baha'i point of view, that ark, what buildings are in that ark? One of them is called the Universal House of Justice. Another one is called the International Teaching Center. Another one's called the International Archives. Another one's called the Library. And there's another one I can't think of. But anyway, so there's 5 buildings in an ark, A-R-C. Together they make up like a boat or a vehicle or an ark, A-R-K, for guiding humanity through the storms that are coming. A whole lot of storms are coming. We're going to need a very strong boat to carry us through the storms. Okay, that's a Baha'i interpretation of this one little line that Baha'u'llah said in the Tablet of Carmel. Any questions, comments, complaints so far today?
No, but regarding the question about Christian churches, their mission is no different than ours, which was to bring people under the advent of Christ's teachings. Okay? And so that's what they did, go out and teach everybody, give the message of Christ. So that's why we have so many churches today.
See, if God gives a message, surely God wants you to spread that message. So the ancient Zoroastrians, they spread their message too. Zoroaster's daughter was named Puruchista. I really like her because she was a great teacher and she spread the Zoroastrian faith. You know how big the Persian Empire got eventually? Wow. So I think religions are supposed to spread if they're from God. That's a safe assumption. As to how, so, these institutions are means of spreading. Okay. Can you look at page 5? Look at the top of page 5. Here's a quote from Isaiah. Isaiah is my favorite prophet in the Old Testament. Moses is a prophet with a capital P, but little p prophet, Isaiah, is amazing. Beautiful language. So
in the Bible, does it differ? Like, does it say capital P or is that just something people read?
no, it's funny because Baha'i writing pays a lot of attention to that, whether it's a capital P or a small p. But not in my Bible, like they call Moses a prophet, and it's just small p. But I think, wait a second, Moses is way more important than those other prophets that were basically just shining a light based on his revelation. Anyway, but that's very controversial stuff. But Isaiah is a really great prophet, small p, and beautiful writing. And the book of Isaiah is really 3 different writers. Don't let that worry you. They're about 250 years apart, but it's all in the same school. In the old days, they would name a writer after the school that they came from. So first Isaiah, second Isaiah, third Isaiah, it's in the school of Isaiah. Don't worry about it. It's all put together in one book. But here's what this guy Isaiah wrote. It shall come to pass in the latter days, that means near the end of the dispensation, that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established. Do you hear that language? The mountain of the house of the Lord. And all nations shall flow to it, and many peoples shall come, that God may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law. This word Zion, it means ancient Israel. It means, some people think it means Jerusalem, but remember Jerusalem was a great city, was the capital of a region. So this basically means the whole area, including Mount Carmel and Jerusalem, and what we would today call Israel, or what was in the old days called Palestine. And once upon a time, it was even called Syria. Depends on how big a piece of that eastern Mediterranean land you're referring to. So Isaiah says, for out of Zion shall go forth the law. The Lord shall judge between the nations and shall decide for many peoples. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now, this passage also has this line about they shall turn their swords into plowshares. Do you remember that line? Anyway, so if you have a sword is what? A weapon. If you turn it into a plowshare, that means it's for agriculture. So that has to be a metaphor for all the money and technology spent on war turning into things for agriculture or for positive uses of technology. Swords into plowshares. See, it's just 3 words, swords into plowshares, but it's just loaded with a prophetic meaning. Okay, so Isaiah is saying someday everyone's going to turn swords into plowshares. And that has to mean something like there will be war no more. All of the intelligence and technology that goes into war will be turned into peaceful means. When is that going to happen? And I think the Baha'i faith is claiming it's going to happen sometime in this dispensation over the next 1,000 years. Humanity will finally learn that war is too expensive. It's too, it has no positive results. Let's use all of the power, economics, and resources we used to use for defense and turn it into education and health, etc.
I'm not going to take you
It sounds like it's talking about the most great peace in a way. Yeah. In the meantime, we'll have less and less war, or more and more negotiated conflict, or regionally discussed conflict. And at some day, we'll have all swords into plowshares. Okay, so this is describing all that. And Zion might as well mean Carmel, right here. That's what I'm saying. Carmel is in Zion.
There's so many biblical references to Mount Zion.
Mount Zion. You know what? I had a Jewish guy told me. Well, Jerusalem is up on a hill too a little bit. You go up to Jerusalem. All the expressions are saying up. But this is like the New Jerusalem. That expression is in the Christian Bible, the New Testament, last book, the New Jerusalem. Okay. We could take a short break if you wanted, or keep going and then go home early. We probably need a break. Let's take about a 5-minute break. I want to tell you something. If you want handouts from previous sessions, they're over here. Number 4, number 3, and number 2. I don't think I have one anymore. You can always ask for it, though, and I can email it. Thank you.
There you go.
Perfect. Okay, you know what I just found out? This man, John, has visited Akka. All of us are blessed because we have visited the visitor of Akka. Recently, like the most recent of anybody in this room. He was on last March. Jericho.
This area. I was mentioning to Harold that I wish I'd taken this course before March. Because
But
we visited and so on, and it was stressed mainly was what the Crusaders had built there.
Yeah.
And how fortified the Akka.
The reason there's a big fortress is because of the Crusaders built it. Then it got reinforced later. Yes.
It's a marvelous city. Actually, you can go when you go underneath, you will see so many beautiful, powerful rocks and pillars.
And also, he reminded me, there's a novel by James Michener called The Source that, uses that part of the world and goes down into history. And so it's an excuse. Each chapter is another level of history. I think he starts in the present and he's talking about Baha'is even, or he's talking about a kibbutz in Israel, right? That's a commune. I worked on one of those once.
Is that right?
Small world. Okay. All right. Now. Yeah, another class.
Small world.
I think I want to jump to this very important stuff on page 6. Can you look at page 6? So, most of what we've been talking about is very positive about humanity's future. Okay, now let's look at some things, some problems. Remember I told you the Guardian likes to make lists of things? And so look at page 6, second paragraph down. He's describing the retributive calamity. You know what that word means, retributive? That means like a punishment. Some kind of calamity that's going to happen to punish humanity. Now, and then he lists a bunch of things that sound very bad. And now Baha'is are wondering, I think this, I'm speaking correctly, that most Baha'is wonder, has all of this happened or has only some of it happened? How much more of it is going to happen? We know that there was World War I and World War II and other bad things in the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century, and there's a lot of possible bad things. All you have to do is turn on the TV. You can quickly get a list of 6 or 7 very scary possible things. Okay, so Golnush, can you read this list that's in, you see it's in italics. It says violent derangement. You see where I'm looking at? Okay, and this is a list. And the Guardian said, these are things that are going to happen or have already happened according to Baha'u'llah. So let's read this. Yeah.
Violent derangement of the world's equilibrium, the trembling that could seize the limbs of mankind, the radical transformation of human society, the rolling up the present-day order, the fundamental changes affecting the structure of government, the weakening of the pillars of religion, the rise of dictatorships, the spread of tyranny, the fall of monarchy, the decline of
Ecclesiastical institutions. That means religious authorities. Right?
ecclesiastical institutions, the increase of anarchy and chaos, the fanning into flame of the smoldering fire of racial strife, the development of the infernal engines of war, the burning of cities, and the contamination of the atmosphere of the earth.
Ooh, these last 3 are really potent, aren't they? The infernal engines of war. You know, infernal? It means hellish, hellish, infernal, or full of fire. Evident today. Infernal engines of war, the burning of cities and the contamination of the atmosphere of the earth. So
This have not happened.
well, some of them sort of happened, like there have been nuclear bombs dropped, right? Contamination of the atmosphere. How about nuclear power plants that contaminated large areas because they had a meltdown? But there were bombs too, 2 of them. And there's testing going on right this second. So, okay, but see, this is the question. How much of this has happened? In other words, humanity has lessons. We didn't quite get all of the guidelines regarding the world's, the most great peace. So we're suffering some of the consequences of having rejected some of those guidelines or taking our time in making the United Nations a truly just organization.
This source of this information that you
Yeah, this is from the Guardian.
110 of
Promised Day has come, I think. I forgot to quote it, but I think it's from the Promised Day has come or World Order of Baha'u'llah. Sometimes the similar lists are in both places. Okay.
And I've also heard that either accompany or herald the big calamity. So these are some of the signs that either will come before or will accompany the calamity.
Interesting. Okay. So it's a question humanity has to face. All right. Now here's another list in the middle of this page. Another list. It's not a quote. It's Harold's version. So I'm summarizing the summarizer. Okay. And these are developmental things that are going to happen. In other words, this is an assignment for humanity. Okay, according to the Guardian, who's interpreting Baha'u'llah. Assignments. I'm reading this list. Diminishing instances, you see where I am? You see the paragraph I'm on? It's under that paragraph called the formative age. Okay, diminishing instances of religious fanaticism and racial animosity. So that would be good, right? Diminishing instances? Fixing boundaries of all nations. Would that be good? Yes, I think that would be good. Clarifying principles of international relations. Good. Reviewing and adjusting international agreements with a view to global justice. Good. See, he's not saying we've done this yet. He's saying we're going to have to do it. And you can already see there's a little bit of progress on these things. Progress toward a single code of international law. Shifting resources formerly used for military purposes over to socioeconomic development and education. Remember that swords into plowshares? Here it is in more social scientific language. An increasing number of nations ceding claims to maintain arms. Can you imagine a rush for nations saying, guess what? We're getting rid of our arms. Australia, they burned them the other day. Did you see that on the news? 35,000 weapons? Okay, that's a sign. Ooh, that's, okay. Let's not get too excited about this list. Limiting the size of armaments of each nation. Gradually combining armed forces from various federated units. An increasing number of nations ceding certain rights to impose taxes. Gradual removal of economic barriers. Greater interdependence of capital and labor. Wow, in other words, some combination of socialism and capitalism. Wow, nationalism gradually being transmuted into consciousness of world citizenship. And each nation coming to reign with honor within the international community as its peoples enjoy heightening degrees of peace and prosperity. You know, my favorite part of the Olympics is that parade they have in the beginning. You ever watch the Olympics? All the nations come, everyone is clapping for everybody. Some nations are big, some are small. Then at the end, they do the same thing. Another one at the end. Little glimpses of international feeling, patriotism toward the world, not just your own country. Love of the world, love of world citizenship. So these are on the agenda of humanity over next 100 years or 200 years.
Following
Please.
Baha'u'llah's statement, let not a man rejoice in that he loves his nation, his country. Nay, rather let him rejoice in this, that he loves his kind.
Beautiful.
That's saying the same
You know, I moved to Canada because Canada was an international nation. You know, isn't that a fantastic idea? A nation that's very international. Wow. Well,
honestly.
You see, here's another thing that when you watch, go back to the Olympics, you'll watch the Olympics and here's a team. This country is called Brazil, but you find black people, white people, brown people, all kinds of people, all are on that Brazilian team. Meaning, Brazil has become an international nation, or it was a multiracial nation to begin with. Plus, it's open to trade with a lot of. Okay, so someday, if all the nations are multinational, they would have reason to not be prejudiced against other nations. That means every nation would know people from all over the world. That would be a good thing. Okay, now look at page 7. This is getting more and more philosophical and interesting, I think. Baha'u'llah's vision of humanity's coming spiritual maturation. I think this is an extremely important theme for the Baha'i faith. The Baha'i faith is claiming that humanity is undergoing a spiritual maturation process. If it's not, then all these things are pie in the sky ideals that are impossible. But if we're actually going to attain some kind of maturity, then they are possible. So Baha'u'lláh mentioned 3 signs of humanity's spiritual maturation. They're quite interesting. One is the discovery of a science, that divine philosophy. It used to be called alchemy. Did you know? Okay. Enabling a transmutation of elements. One substance will be transformed into others, and this is a glimpse of the splendors of future knowledge expansion. In other words, someday humanity will know how to change a tin can into gold, or to almost anything else, and on the chart, the periodic chart. I understand we can already do this, but it's expensive. So Baha'u'llah is saying there will come a time when that will be easy to do. And humanity, see what that means is you can pretty much wipe out poverty. If you can turn anything into anything else, think about the implications of that. Okay, that's one sign. Divine philosophy. 2, the official selection of a single language and a common script. So that would mean it isn't just the United Nations that decides it, it would be the world deciding it officially, that we have a language we can all speak and have a common script, in addition to our own, the one we grew up with. And a third one, no one will accept to bear the burden of kingship. I think that means that no one will have an ego so big that they think they should be king. There will come a time when no one thinks that way. No one is willing to say, let me be a monarch, a sole decision maker for a large body of people. No one will even think that way. Instead, I think this means people will look at leadership as a consultative process, a cooperative process, that everyone makes a contribution, and there will come a time when no one wants to tell everyone else what to do. How far away is that day? Well, there's some people who think like this now, but there's some who are a long way from thinking this way. A very long way. Okay, we won't mention any names.
Also orders everyone to follow that king who would accept the kingship. So you should support him and you should be obeying him. So
well, I know that's another set of teachings about kingship, that basically the kingship is a noble or divine institution. But this is saying human beings on the earth will come to a point where no one wants that role. Because, why? They're in a cooperative mode. That's very fascinating to me. That's like a psychological development. Okay, just to point that out, yes.
I think one of the primary reasons is, no matter how you look at it, when you think of the self, the nucleus of self, from anyone's perspective, it's purely selfish. But when you put it into the hands of the group, it's not. So the turning over of the government into the hands of the people by Queen Victoria was that whole process. She is a monarchy, but really has no power. It's the parliament of the people that has all the power. So the responsibility and onus is all of the people, not the king or queen.
Yeah, there are more and more glimpses of this. I remember there was a certain style of leadership called servant leadership. I heard about this in 1980, before I even heard about the Baha'i faith. Servant leadership. In other words, the goal of a leader is to become a servant. It's a full of interesting techniques on how to become a better servant. That's not a Baha'i concept. I mean, well, it is a Baha'i concept, but I mean, that movement was a completely secular understanding of a new kind of leadership. Someday the world would have more and more servant leaders. I think it's very true that that's the direction. Okay, quickly, bottom of page 7 is some more language from the Guardian about this humanity's spiritual maturation or coming of age. The coming of age of humanity. Okay. And Steve, can you read where it says the revelation of Baha'u'llah? Do you see that
Yeah.
line? Okay, so this is about two-thirds of the way down on page 7. Okay.
The revelation of Baha'u'llah, whose supreme mission is none other than the achievement of this organic and spiritual unity of the whole body of nations, should, if we be faithful to its implications, be regarded as signalizing through its advent the coming of age of the entire human race, marking the last and highest degree in the stupendous evolution of man's collective life on this planet.
So that's one of those long guardian sentences that it's worth studying over and over and over. So someday, it's saying that someday historians will look back and realize it was the guidance of Baha'u'llah, or the revelation, that began the process of organic and spiritual unity of the whole body of nations. Someday we'll trace it to that. That's interesting. Okay. The next paragraph. Roya, can you read that?
I have to admit, I'm not sure where we are.
The emergence of the
Oh,
world.
yeah.
The emergence of a world community, the consciousness of world citizenship, the founding of a world civilization and culture must synchronize with the initial stages of the unfoldment of the golden age of the Baha'i era. Baha'u'llah specifically laid down a set of laws, established definite institutions, and provided for the essentials of a divine economy. These are destined to be a pattern for future society, supreme instrument for the establishment of the most great peace, and the one agency for the unification of the world and the proclamation of the reign of righteousness and justice upon the earth.
Okay. So that's using the word world a lot. World community, world citizenship, world civilization.
What? It's
Please.
capitalized divine economy.
You know, that came up in my other 2 classes that are looking at this same material. And you know what I did? Jack McLean wrote a book on The Guardian, and he had a section of one of his chapters on this term, divine economy. And he was trying to understand, you know, first of all, Baha'u'llah used that phrase a couple of times, not many, but then The Guardian listed here. It seems to mean, and I'm only saying, I'm speculating, my understanding of what Jack McLean was saying is that a little bit like hukuk. In other words, the divine economy would be economy based on the idea of everyone cares about all the rest, right? So imagine a global economy where every nation feels like it's part of the global economy and has moral and spiritual obligations and opportunities to serve. That's not like any kind of economy we have now. I mean, you see pockets of that kind of economy. Say an organization like a school or a hospital where people know about all the other roles and they try to help. Okay, they give or they receive. So that's what I think it means. It's sort of like, in other words, a morally, an economy that would be morally and spiritually undergirded. Here's another way to put it. It's not capitalism. It's not socialism. You know, I hear among macroeconomists, they're talking about cooperativism. They think that something is going to happen. It's different. It's neither capitalism nor socialism, cooperative, or maybe a divine economy. So I think it means an economy that has all its parts, all its agencies and participants are morally and spiritually aware. So you're exchanging not only money and goods and services, but gifts, creative gifts of various kinds. Like, you know, I hear that some people are trying to invent some new kind of money that is not just, it's way beyond my expertise. But I think that's all implied in this term. Like, we're going to grow into understanding what a divine economy is. Micro loans in Bangladesh. Yeah, that's right. They got the Nobel Prize for that. See, imagine, but a divine economy would be not, that wouldn't be special anymore. That would be ordinary, as I understand it. That it would, you'd find that everywhere. Okay, now the last paragraph is something I wrote. This is only my impression. You know, you find lots of big terms in Baha'i writings like the divine kingdom on earth. You see the bold print at the bottom? Promised day, day of fulfillment, humanity, spiritual maturation, and then the phrases I have at the very bottom there: the world order of Baha'u'llah, the golden age of the Baha'i era, the world commonwealth, and the most great peace. I believe that these terms are almost interchangeable. At least that's my current thinking. I'm just, that's not a, I can't say that on any Baha'i authority, but it starts to make sense to me when I think of it that way, that we need a lot of words for the way the world will be in the future. And so here are some of them. See, some of them are prophetic terms, like that come out of other scriptures, like the divine kingdom on earth. And then the promised day, day of fulfillment. Humanity, spiritual maturation. This is a major theme of Baha'u'llah's message. It's sort of like a pep talk for humanity. Hang in there through all the calamities that are coming, because you're undergoing a maturing process. And someday it will indeed be possible to have a society of peace, justice, and prosperity for everyone, not just the privileged, right? So hang in there, because we're maturing. So it's a very powerful theme, and all these different words are needed to convey it. Yeah.
Also in the Christian text.
They have their words, you know. See, that's my hope. Someday there's going to be a conference among religious leaders or students, and they're going to compare their images of the future, and they're going to study these phrases and what they might mean, and what would be required of humanity to get there, to actually bring it about. Okay, any comments, questions, please?
The majority of human beings that live out, as Baha'u'llah said, I heard, the position of king to be available and nobody can accept it. And then we can say the maturity of human being. Human being can reach at that maturity. The position of king is available, but nobody can accept it. Advertising someone post for the king, but nobody can accept it. That is, they say, the maturity of human being at that stage.
I think society is evolving through a process of maturity where it's forcing that reality anyway. But what that is just saying is that even if that person who come from that royal family or whatever had that opportunity, they would say no.
Actually, the original Farsi passage of Baha'u'llah is the word for government or the kingship is Bemonet. Anyhow, it's a woman's name that says, so sometimes the Sultanat. So actually, there is a joke some Baha'is make. It says Sultanat remains, and no one shows any kind of interest in that person. And Sultanat is also a name of a woman, so she becomes a very
Sovereignty. I'm pretty sure Sultanate means sovereignty.
sovereignty, or the name of a woman. So Sultanat بمعنى أحد إخواننا.
Oh, right.
You know, here's another aspect that people don't think of. It's very unusual. Some people, you know, many people who love to do service. They're always trying to do service. Do you know anyone who does so much service that no one else gets to do any service? You see what I'm saying? If people have the service ethic, they can do so much service that everyone else just sits around and there's nothing left to do. But let's say they're kind of like what Baha'u'llah says. So they're like a king. They're a servant leader, a true servant leader. A true servant leader wouldn't you do all the service and not leave any for anyone else. In other words, a servant leader would probably not only do a lot of service, but they'd invent other forms of service to keep the divine economy growing. Divine economy. In other words, the future of society is along that line. We will be inventing ways to help people. And an example, I was last night listening on TV. There was a guy named Bill Moyers. I used to live in the United States. I'm sorry to admit that. But anyway, there was a program in the United States called the Peace Corps. Do you remember that? I mean, you're not old enough, or maybe, but what you did, yes, you see, but Bill Moyer talked to Kennedy about that, and he was the director of the Peace Corps for the first 3 years. Anyway, I'm listening to that because I was in something called Teacher Corps. So this basically what this was a program saying, when you're about 18, you're graduating high school, you should go serve the world for a year somewhere. That should be the first thing you do before you go anywhere else, before you find the person you're going to marry, before you figure out what your profession is. You should go serve the world. Like, in other words, I know someone that went to Peru, worked with the poor, and I was in Teacher Corps, which was similar. I worked with migrant children along the Rio Grande River, right next to Mexico, between Mexico and the United States. So Peace Corps was full of people who they get excellent international experience and service, and they work on teams and they study. Usually they learn another language so they can, be bilingual at least. Why am I bringing this up? Because humanity maturing, we're going to actually invent ways for us to serve each other. New and creative ways to do it. I think we're still at the point where some people are such good servants that they do it for everyone else. For example, when I'm a Baha'i, and so I go to feasts, I usually get there early and set up all the chairs. Why should I set up all the chairs? It's depriving other people of setting up the chairs. So I'm getting I'm using a stupid example, but service can get in the way of other service, and we need to invent other types of service. This is a very important part of humanity's maturation, I believe. It's a good illustration of the divine economy, too. The future divine economy will have lots of opportunities for service. In fact, everyone, whether you're autistic or not, everyone, no matter what capacity level you have, there will be some kind of service. We'll figure out something. I hear that it's better to be autistic for certain kinds of jobs, like technical jobs. I don't know the truth of that, and there's different kinds of autism. But, okay.
Well, I think also within the Baha'i community and environment, the Ruhi style educational process is kind of doing the same thing, creating a culture whereby others are educated to be teachers of others, and we can then leave and provide another service to some other person, right?
Fascinating.
So they carry on with others. So we can't be the means and ends.
We will see a day that if you want to serve, you have to put your name on a waiting list. There's so many other people who want to serve, and they are before you.
But then the divine economy hasn't kicked into motion yet. Because when it does, there will be a lot of jobs available for everyone who wants to serve. Things to do. Okay. Please.
Something about no one will accept to bear the burden of kingship. I found this article I saw this summer that Prince Harry says no one in royal family wants to be king or queen. Yeah.
Oh.
Harry. The youngest one. He said we will continue to carry out our duties and we're going to continue to serve people, our people. So nobody wants the throne in
Yeah.
It's a sign.
Another way to put that is we all want to be of service, right? We don't want to be directing everyone else's service. only. Or, yeah, so there's a program called The Crown that I want to see again. There's 10 episodes, The Crown. Because I think of that in spiritual terms. The crown is a role occupied by a person. But the role is very, I think they're describing something like Baha'u'llah has described. That an intermediary, like for example, the manifestation is an intermediary between God and humanity. Intermediaries between the manifestation and humanity, well, some of them are named Abdul Baha, but I think kings are down there too. See, I mean, the role of king or crown, more broadly, would be someone who is almost egoless, right? Their job is to bring peace and justice in as wide a possible circle, and prosperity. You might throw that in there too. That would be the role of someone fulfilling the possibility of the crown. And all cultures would have their own version of that. Okay, the last page, I put, holy days here, because we didn't have them anywhere else. And I got to say something about this. There are different kinds of minds. I personally think of holy days as particular to a certain faith. For example, all of these holy days, do they mean much to a Christian?
No.
Or if you saw a list of Christian holy days, would they mean much to you if you're a Baha'i? You see what I'm getting at? You see, in other words, each religion has particular aspects and universal aspects. Almost everything we've been talking about is the universal side of religion, universal side of the Baha'i faith. But the Baha'i faith has particularities, and here's how I understand them. Certain things happen as a new religion is developing that become so important that all the followers of that faith are supposed to revisit them every year. For example, the first day of Rizwan. So this is celebrating the declaration of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad. And the 9th day is part of you could say, the king of festivals. First day, 9th day, 12th day. That's all Rizwan, 12 days. And doing it every year means each year, and you're not allowed to do it the same way. At least that's what I sort of learned as a baby Baha'i. I don't know if that's true. I'm only 17 years old as a Baha'i, but aren't Baha'is supposed to not do it exactly the same way? Because if we do it the same way as we did last year, we're not learning anything new, and we're developing what's called liturgy or a ritual. And pretty soon your eyes start rolling over because you've done this before. The danger of ritual, here's an example. I was in Israel one summer working on a kibbutz, and I go to a bar mitzvah. You know what a bar mitzvah is? A celebration for boys becoming a man, 13 or 14. And this beautiful ceremony was going on. The rabbi was talking, beautiful words, and nobody was listening to him. Everyone is just talking and having fun. And I thought, and then someone explained to me why that's true. They know what he's saying. He's saying the same thing they've heard 1,000 times. Exactly the same thing. Oh, that's why they're not listening to him. So in other words, for a ritual not to become routine, it has to be a little bit different each time. So I think Baha'u'llah wanted us not to form rigid rituals regarding these holy days. So they're a brand new learning experience each year. Okay, wow. And then not all of them are equally important. That's another thing about holy days. We have to say those, the king of festivals, those are very, very important. How about the birth of the Bab and birth of Baha'u'llah? They're important too. I put them here, twin holy birthdays. But still, I don't think they're quite as important as Rizwan, but still very important. They all have, their distinctness and reason for being. And here's a confession. I never knew what a Yamiha was, really. I mean, I had gone to a Yamiha, and, as a new Baha'i, relatively young, it looked to me like it was basically a gift-giving party. It involved children. And I didn't know that it had any spiritual significance. But then look here, what it says. Intercalary days, days of Ha. Ha is the letter H in Arabic and is associated with God's unknowable essence. These are days unbounded by the usual considerations of time. In other words, these are days, John, just so you know, Baha'is have 19 months of 19 days. Okay, so these are the days left over. If you multiply 19 times 19, it's 361, and then you have 4 days left. What do you do with them? And so this is a Yamiha, and look what else it says here. These days are unbounded by usual considerations of time and space. They are devoted to spiritual contemplation and preparations for the fast, as well as to hospitality, feasting, charity, and gift giving. Well, the last few Yamihas I've gone to have been spectacular. And I don't know that if it's because I just learned what they really are all about, or that we're learning and getting better at it. It's hard. I don't know the truth of the matter. What's that? Combination of both. Combination. Okay, so I'm just putting the holy days here and a little bit about them in case people don't know this. At least this is my attempt to, what would you say briefly to someone that didn't know about it? This is my attempt to do that. There may be a better way to do it. All right. Anything else? Any observations about today? We're all done with Baha'u'llah. Not really, because next time we have to look at Abdu'l-Baha and the Guardian and the forming of the Universal House of Justice in 1963. Why is that exactly 100 years after 1863? Is that an accident?
Proclamation of Baha'u'llah to all the kings and rulers of the world in 1863.
Well, okay, let's talk about it next time. Yeah, those proclamations started in 1867. What happened in 1863 was the declaration of Baha'u'llah. In other words, so this is exactly 100 years after that. And when I was investigating the Baha'i faith, studying, I was still a Unitarian minister. It was 1992. And someone said to me, would you like to go to New York? And I said, well, I was born in New York. What's happening in New York? They said, well, it's the centenary of the ascension of Baha'u'llah. Is that right? 1992. Yes, it was 100 years after. So they had a meeting there with 30,000 people at the Javits Center in New York. And people came from all over the world, and there were some things that guests could go to. This person was inviting me on their money. They're going to fly me to New York to be part of this when I'm just a seeker. They were willing to do that. I didn't know what I was saying no to. I said, oh, I'm too busy. I can't go. Later on, I learned what it was that I missed. And I saw a 4-hour video of things that had happened at that. What was the official name of that event?
World Congress.
World Congress. It was like a world.
Second World Congress.
Yeah, instead of, okay. Anyway, so I have a little bit of a better sense of what I missed. Okay, anything else for the good of the order, please?
Guardian, I'm confused with that.
Oh, that guy, his name was Shoghi Effendi. It's not the newspaper in London. Yeah, a lot of the classes I teach are about world history and stuff like that, so the Guardian sounds like it's,
I thought I saw a strange name sometimes when you said Guardian.
Yeah, that's the title Baha'is used for that man, Shoghi Effendi, who was the successor to Abdul Baha, who was the successor to Baha'u'llah. So we're going to try to clear that up in the last session. You might take that last session downtown or here. Yeah, he's taking both classes.
Next Sunday we have feast in here. So, can you change the hours? Change the hours? Start earlier?
Okay, you know who to ask? Tabassum Eblagi. Everyone talk to Tabassum. If you can change when this is, that means we have to schedule it. Ask Tabassum to fix that problem. And she can email me. She knows she has my email address.
And then you will inform us?
Yeah, once we fix it, I can, I have all your email addresses right here. Because it's okay with me. It might help me too. I have a feast somewhere too, but we have, ours is one, we have, you know, what do they call them? Area feasts, right? And some are different times, Saturday and Sunday. Please, yes.
When you talk about interfaith collaboration,
She's pretending like the class hasn't ended yet. Okay, yeah, okay.
I'm following someone on social media and he's quite involved in interfaith collaboration.
I am too.
Right, so I'm assuming that there are many, I don't know, in North America or not?
You know what's going to happen? There's a lot of international interfaith organizations. One of them is called the World Parliament of Religions.
Right.
Guess where that's going to be?
Yeah.
See, every 5 years they have a big conference.
Yeah.
Toronto.
Oh,
And it's going to be in the springtime, but we're going to hear. I think it's coming up sooner than that. But you know who's going to tell us is Gerald Filson. He's on the National Spiritual Assembly, but he's also does his external affairs work too. And so it's called the World Parliament of Religions, and they meet every 5 or 6 years in some part of the world. Like they've met in South Africa, and they've met in Chicago, and they've met in Australia. And they usually 10 or 12,000 people come. Baha'is have been involved in that one in particular, World Parliament of Religions. It started in 1892. Does that sound? No, 1893. That's the year after Baha'u'llah ascended. Someone mentioned Baha'u'llah at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. So Baha'is have been very interested in that particular interfaith group. That's at the international level. They have them at the national level, regional level, local level. I have one in Abbotsford called Abbotsford Interfaith Movement, AIM, you know, Baha'is and other groups. It's a way of learning and cooperating across faith groups. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? This is a well-attended class for Thanksgiving weekend. Thank you so much. And we'll try to fix the problem. Tell Tabassum to schedule another time. Please, please. Thank you. And then we'll tell you.